Can you see me, Rabbi? Okay, that's fine. You
Yeah.
can use my stock image will work. That's as long as you can see something.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the crew? We had trouble getting on board, for about. Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you. I had trouble getting on.
Okay, fine, fine.
It
That's
did
all.
not
Just
appear in my Zoom calendar.
okay. That's all right. I was just telling Brendan. Sometimes Rabbi Papi isn't available because he isn't available, not because there's something wrong with our device, which is what we usually think, or something wrong with our
Yeah,
connection.
no, I would have let everybody know if I couldn't make it. Um, so hi, Shell, long time no see. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Um,
Carol, hi, Shah.
you don't have
Your video's not on, Yehudi.
yeah, so Susie, I know you're here, and Bob, I know you. Oh, Bob, I can't see you or hear you.
There's a connecting to audio coming on.
Um,
Oh,
and Susie, I have you listed here, but we don't see you.
We want Susie. We want Susie. How does that go? Anu wrote him. Shoshana. Is that your Hebrew name?
Yeah, there you go.
Hello.
Hi there.
So is that your Hebrew name, Shoshana?
What?
What's your Hebrew name?
What's my Hebrew name? Sarah Leah.
Oh, boy, was rival. Okay. Anu wrote him. Sarah Leah. You were obscure for about 2 minutes.
Okay, that's all right. Setting up here.
Well, we could also say Anu wrote him. Rachab Hazana.
Yeah, well,
That's what
that's
Torah
what
is
we're going to
about.
talk about. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorayim Tovim. Sorry about some trouble getting on. I know that Maddie and Ricky can't make it. They are both busy, but and Bob, I don't know if you're here. I saw you join, but you haven't appeared.
Hmm.
And if you're here, I can't hear you, or we can't hear you.
Maybe he's not here.
Bob has often done that. In other
Yeah.
words, okay, you don't see his image, but it says he's connected to audio.
Okay. We don't hear him. He might be muted and have his video off. Anyway, we're going to get started. So here we are in Parashat Shlach Lecha, which is the very famous parasha where Moshe sends out 12 spies. Although there it doesn't, and tells them there, Latour et haaretz, to check out the land, to see it. And we know the end of that story. 10 of the spies come back and say, yes, the land is beautiful, it's wonderful. However, is inhabited by giants. We can't defeat them. We can't do this, except for, and Caleb and Yehoshua say, yes, we can. We just have to have faith. And ultimately, the 10 spies sway the whole community. They refuse to go up, and God says, okay, you don't want to go up, then you're not going up, not for 40 years. This generation is going to die. And of course, they feel bad. No, 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 no. And they try and conquer the land. It, of course, fails miserably. So thus begins the wandering through the desert. And finally, as we get to Sefer Yehoshua, the people are about to cross over into the land. And once again, Yehoshua sends out spies. But maybe he's a little bit smarter than Moshe. Maybe he just remembers that, that only 2 of them brought back a good report. So he sends out 2. And this is the story of their scouting reconnaissance mission. It's actually as much a story about Rachav as we'll see. So,
Oh, it is though. That's exactly correct. The story is more about Rachav than it is about the spy. I think what you just said is right on, Rebecca.
yeah, and also this story has all kinds of resonances. There are all kinds of connections to other parts of the Tanakh. And there is a tremendous similarity between Rachav and Yael, if we will looking ahead to the Book of Judges. There are similarities as well to Rachav and Lot. So actually there's I believe an article on, I believe it's on the Torah.com. The choice to serve God and assist his people, Rachav and Yael. So and and unfortunately I came across these articles late. A wonderful article, Reading Rachav by Tikva Freimer-Kensky. I don't remember where that appears, but so
We'll
all
look
kinds-
for
yeah. So
Reading Rachav by Tikva Freimer-Kensky. Okay.
who would like to begin reading?
I will.
Thank you, Susie.
Yehoshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men, spies, from Shittim secretly, saying, "Go look over the land, especially Jericho." They went and they came to the house of a whore woman. Her name was Rachav, and they laid down there.
Yeah. So Rachav is described as Isha Zonah, and that sets up a lot of the story. How do we understand it? First of all, we have Rashi's explanation, which is based on the Targum, the Aramaic translation.
A lady innkeeper, according to the Targum Yonatan,
Looks like he's
an
on.
innkeeper
Yep, he's on.
sold
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
very
sorry.
good.
food.
Yeah.
So
So,
how did they translate it as whore before that?
well, because the word zonah throughout the Bible generally means whore, not.
Oh, we settled that last time. Remember when we were talking about Shimshon and also about with Hosea? I think we pretty well settled that. Zonah in the Tanakh simply means a woman who does not behave sexually according to the listed standards. And today you would call her, in quotes, a loose woman, something like that.
Yeah.
But, in other words, nothing is said about Rachav's nationality. Nothing is said about her allegiance. The only thing that's said is that she's basically, obviously, there are people who are coming there other than her own family. That's clear from the beginning.
Yeah. But I think that it's anything but settled. I mean, I think that it is correct. I mean, for example, we'll have later on the story of the 2 Nashim Zonot, the 2 women that come to Shlomo with the problem of, both have babies. One of them dies, and one steals the other, and
Oh, I'm not
claim
saying
the
that it
baby.
can't mean professional prostitute. Please,
Yeah,
brother.
right,
All I said is it doesn't necessarily, that's not the default understanding of the word.
right. It's not
Sometimes it is
necessarily.
appropriate and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. But if it does mean that here, if it does mean poor woman as it's translated,
Or it could mean a madam, or it could mean somebody who runs a brothel.
exactly, yeah, which I think to some extent is the fact is, she is presented as a colorful character. Let's put it that way. And hi Dan, hi Rabbi Zucker.
Good afternoon.
And
There's
Took a while
another
to get in
colorful
there.
character.
yeah, so but from the word zan to provide, like hazan etakol and Birkat Hamazon, the blessing over the food, who God so Rashi explains that she's
Pundakit.
pundikita.
I'll have fun
Kita.
now.
Yeah, an innkeeper. And by the way, Radak also follows this interpretation. However,
One of
Malvi,
them point out that Jonathan often uses the word pundaka as a translation for zona, not just here. In other words, in other words, it's not like he's specifically saying that for this particular zone. And this is actually on the Makor Kadolo page in the name of one of the other parshanim, saying that the fact that he says here Pundika, it does not mean that he thinks, that that's special about Rachav. He uses the word as an Aramaic translation for Zona elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. But what is still wonderful is that what our tradition does with Rachav. Because, within this story, I mean, we know the story, we'll read it, but we know that she hides the spies when the king comes looking for them. She has no problems lying to the king. And, it says she hides them even before the king comes. And then she sends the pursuers off on a wild goose chase. And in the meantime, she lets the spies escape. But at the same time, she stipulates that, hey, listen, there's a quid pro quo here. I recognize that God is God, and God has put the fear of God, literally, on everyone, and just protect me and my family, and I'll do all this for you. And so she stands out as other characters in the Bible of non-Jews who either help Israel or are people of piety. Another example are the sailors in the book of Jonah. Jonah, the great prophet, he goes the opposite direction from where he's supposed to go to Nineveh. And then he goes into the ship and he lies down. Horrible storm. Everybody's working. He's asleep. But the sailors, they're the ones who they're praying to their gods, and they don't want to harm Jonah. So, and you have other cases, and Yael not necessarily being portrayed as a pious individual, but certainly she helps Israel. Okay, so Rachav, just reading the story, is a very positive character. So I'll go on. Here is the commentary of Malbim, who reads it in a particular way.
They came to the house of a whore woman. Her name was Rachav. There was here a double ruse. A, so they would not be recognized as Israelites, they came to a home of a prostitute. It was known to the inhabitants of Canaan that Israel is a nation that despises perversion, and it would not occur to them that representatives of Israel would connect themselves with the house of a prostitute.
Okay, so Malbim is seeing here a stratagem. They went in the last place that anyone would look. That's making some assumptions that I don't know were totally true, but it's clever that how he's understanding what the Meraglim are doing here. And then his second reason.
B, because her name was wide.
That's
She
what
was
Rachav
famous
means.
through her name with all the leaders of the land, as it is written in the Talmud Bavli Megillah.
Mhm.
Rachav aroused impure thoughts by her name. The hidden details of the leaders of the land and their secrets, and through her they would examine all that was happening in the land. Therefore, they went to no other place and rested there.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of humorous, and we're going to get to the rabbinic materials in a moment. Picking up on modern commentators have done this. Her name is wide, so we sometimes say
That for
Or
English,
in the slang, abroad. She was abroad.
broad. That's what you want.
Abroad.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could be
Translate directly
abroad.
into English.
Yeah, it would be abroad, but there are other connotations here, as we'll see when we get to the rabbinic material. But it's kind of this notion that, she has an in, as it were, with all of the leaders of the land. Again, she may not have been
It
as
has in it anyway. That's how she's running her business.
yeah. I mean, she is maybe she
INN.
Yeah, it could be an inn, or it could be, as we said before, a brothel. And, kind of the cynicism about a leadership and, what goes on. And I've mentioned before when we've looked at this story that in many, many mysteries, I remember Sherlock Holmes movies and, other things. People, when they are detectives, when they really want to know, or superheroes for that matter, when they want to know what's going on, they go into the seedier parts of town. They want to know what's really happening. Where do we get the real dirt on everyone? It's almost a motif in a lot of different movies and shows, etc. So I think to some extent that's Malbim picks up on that. And also it's not an unknown folkloric motif that you have the hooker with the heart of gold. That again, we see that in all kinds of stories. For that matter, today in movies we had the film with
Pretty Woman.
pardon me, well, Pretty Woman is certainly one. Then also Trading Places.
Mhm.
It was Jamie Curtis, her character. Again, it's a folkloric motif. So whether she was a madam, was a loose woman, she's a colorful character. That's the best thing to say. And I think Malbim is picking up on it. And he's picking up on it partially because that's what we really have within the biblical material, within the rabbinic materials. So we have a section here in Bavli Megillah, which I always get the sense that the rabbis who surely understood Megillat Esther realized that it was a rather bawdy book.
It
And
was what?
a bawdy book, a ribald text. And they interpreted it that way, and it gave them kind of an excuse to engage their imaginations, shall we say. And here we have one that's pretty clear. So here's, we're going to come back to another section in Talmud Megillah, but here we have kind of an, I hate to say it, it's like a bunch of guys sitting around a locker room,
That's exactly right.
and
They're
that's,
sitting around the table in the Beit Midrash.
yeah, they're sitting around the
I'm glad
Beit
you
Midrash.
said it, because if you wouldn't, I would.
Yeah, and I've also sat around the Beit Midrash. So, it's when you have a bunch of guys, of course, by the time, I very often sat around a Beit Midrash with men and women. But, let's be honest, guys will be guys. Boys will be boys. Okay, go on, Susie.
The sages taught Rachav aroused impure thoughts by her name, Yael by her voice, Abigail by remembering her, Michal, the daughter of Saul, by her appearance.
Yeah, so
Rabbi
by the
Yitzchak
way,
said,
wait a second. The introduction for this, or the before this, they were talking about, there were four beautiful women in the Bible. And or there are four, attractive women and are sexually enticing women, and these were their characteristics. And of course, Rachav we know, Yael we know, Abigail, she's the one who eventually married David, Michal, the daughter of Shaul. So anyway, they spend a little bit more time on Rachav. As now go on.
Rabbi Yitzchak said, anyone who says Rachav, Rachav immediately experiences seminal omission. Rav Nachum said to him, I say Rachav, Rachav, and it does not affect me.
In other words, like, calm down, relax. You're a little bit, I mean, it's quite a put down here. And then
Rabbi Yitzchak said to Rabbi Nachman, when I said this, I was referring to one who knows her personally and recognizes her beauty.
okay, I don't know if he totally got out of that one, but there's there's a bit of humor. The book of Esther is a funny book, and the rabbis play with it a little bit. My teacher, uh, God, Eliezer Diamond, once talked about halachas, the rabbis at work, and agadah, the rabbis at play. And here we've got a little bit of that. So now we go on to another interesting expression from Bavli Zvachim.
The sages said she was 10 years old when Israel left Egypt, and she engaged in prostitute all 40 years that Israel was in the wilderness. After 50 years, she converted. She said, "May I be forgiven as a reward for rope, window, and flax, through which I saved the spies."
Yeah, so, she engaged in these acts for all of her previous actions. She should be forgiven because she used these implements to rescue the spies. She hid them in the flax. She let them down out the window with a rope. And this desire to, if you will, rehabilitate Rachav continues in Jewish tradition. Just take a look at a couple of, we'll come back to a larger section, but just a couple of examples here. Footnote 2.
Rachav would undergo a transformation in later Jewish tradition. Matt 1.
This is Matthew.
Okay.
The Gospels are not formally Jewish literature, but Matthew is indeed the most Jewish of all the Gospels. And certainly at the time of the Gospels, or I think around the time of the Gospels, there was still a much closer connection between Judaism and Christianity. Scholars keep pushing off, the divergence when they actually separated much later in history, and that's probably too for
Rabbi Pop,
yeah.
I think it might be a little easier to just explain that the New Testament would not put in as an ancestress of Jesus the name of a woman who was mentioned as a whore in the Bible unless they had a tradition of that nature. In other words, all Matthew was reflecting there is it was widely believed among the Jewish community that we didn't get to Jesus without getting involved with a whole pile of women, none of whom were really exactly mainline, but that's a Jewish tradition. Somehow we didn't preserve it. We should be lucky at home.
Well, that's why I'm bringing in this text, because clearly they are drawing. The gospel is drawing on a Jewish tradition, and so much so that they're willing. Now, this does not necessarily Rachav that is mentioned in the book of Joshua, but why do they mention this name Dafka? And this is placed at the beginning of Matthew, which has the genealogy of Jesus. Just as a side note, of the four Gospels, three of them are known as the Synoptic Gospels because they pretty much tell the same story. Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Mark is the earliest of them. There is no genealogy of Jesus. There's no birth story of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. There is in the Gospel of Matthew, which is the most, as I said, Jewish of the Gospels. And you'll see that here he traces Jesus back to Abraham. In the Gospel of Luke, that is expanded even further. It's a much more universalistic perspective, and he traces Jesus back to Adam. And then the Gospel of John, which kind of stands outside the Synoptic Gospels, that's less concerned with the history and life of Jesus than it is with the mystery of Jesus. So basically, there's no genealogy, but Jesus is traced back to God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then a few verses later, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Very, very different. But as Yehudi pointed out, clearly they're drawing on a known Jewish tradition, and you could just
think about it, Rabbi Papa. If it wouldn't be for the church, we would never even know who Judah the Maccabee was. I mean, the church preserves Josephus. They preserved Chashmonaim, Aleph, and Bet.
The Maccabean, a lot. The Apocrypha.
Yeah, the entire
exactly.
Apocrypha.
That's my point. But not a single, normative Jewish text mentions Yehuda HaMaccabee. The kind of text is studied in the yeshiva that was canonized, and for that matter, was even accessible in the Middle Ages. Okay, you know how they found about Yehuda Maccabee? That Sefer Josephus, that Italian 10th century rehash of Josephus. That's the book that people learn Jewish history from. And that's how Jews knew who Yehuda HaMaccabee was in the Middle Ages. They did not know that from any Jewish source. Okay, so let's what's the word here? Let's give thanks for things that we should be giving thanks for.
Yeah, well, and I actually have taught in the past. How do we understand Handel's Judaeus Maccabeus? Why does the guy who write the Messiah also write about beautiful oratorio on Judah the Maccabee?
And a big audience in London that were Jewish.
Yeah, well, that and the fact that Judah the Maccabee became, because of the Apocrypha, became a hero in medieval Christianity. He's mentioned in, I think, in Dante.
But he did play to his Jewish audience. Look at oratorios like Samson, Saul. In other words, basically, Jews have always been attracted to the theater in modern times, probably because it was forbidden to them in earlier times. Remember, the Midrash always go around saying, we do on our day off, that Shabbat, we learn, we study. You know what they do? They go to their circuses and their theaters, theatron. That's where we got the word from. The Midrash is put down of people who go to the theater.
Right. So anyway, coming back to this tradition. So Susie, if you just read this.
An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerach by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Aminadab, and Aminadab the father of Nachshon, and Nachshon the father of Salmon. What?
Salmon.
Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rachav, and Boaz the father of Oved by Ruth, and Oved the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David.
And they go down to Jesus. But the point is,
but every one of the women in this list is a woman who's somewhat questionable.
Yeah. Okay.
Has something about her that would basically wonder how this woman got to be an ancestress of the Messiah. Tamar,
well, certainly she deceived
and Ruth too. Ruth
she was a Moabite. Okay, and so Yalkut Shimoni, a later midrash, kind of further expands on the biblical text, which we'll see above in not the biblical text, the rabbinic text. We'll see already it existed in the rabbinic tradition, but just to take a look at it here.
And what reward did she receive for this?
That is, what reward did the Rachav receive?
She merited that 8 prophets and priests would descend from her, and they are Jeremiah, Hilkiah, Sariah.
Yeah, I mean, we actually don't have to read all of these, but the point is that probably prophets that were also priests. So it's like, look who she gave birth to. And then finally, let me just mention here that there is a long piece in Pirkei de Rav Kahana, which takes the people of Israel to task for not living up to Rachav's example. In other words, they give all these examples of Israel's reproachful behavior here, but it's contrasted with what Rachav did. Look at how she behaved, and look how you lowlifes behave. It's that. So there, she is seen as an example for embarrassing the Israelites. She's so good. Now let's go back to read a fuller presentation of the rabbinic materials on Rachav here. So going back to, would somebody like to continue here? Rav Nachman said, this is back in Bavli Megillah. Anybody else volunteer to read?
Yeah, I'll read if no one else.
Okay, Rav Nachman said.
Rav Nachman said, Huda was a descendant of Joshua. It is written here, Huda, the prophetess, the wife of Shalom, the son of Tikva, the son of Harhas, and it says elsewhere with regard to Joshua, they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath Heres.
Cheres. Yeah, in other words, very similar words.
Okay.
Harchas, Cheres.
Therefore, intimidating that there is a certain connection between them.
Yeah, they're playing here a little bit, but because again, there's we talked about before, the Midrash's desire to flee from anonymity. And so if Huldah the prophetess, what do we know about her? She's a prophetess, obviously important, and this is her lineage, and we can make a connection. It's not exactly a strong connection, but for the rabbis it was enough. But then we go on.
Rav Aina, the elder, raised an objection to Rav Nachman. 8 prophets who were also priests descended from Rahav the prostitute, and they are Neriah, his son Baruch, Sariah, Maasirah, Jeremiah, his father, Hilkiah, Jeremiah's cousin, Hanamel, and Hanamel's father, Shalom. Rabbi Yehuda said, so too Huda, the prophetess, was a descendant of Rahav, the prostitute. It is written here, the son of Tikva, and is written elsewhere, the cord of Tikva, scarlet thread from Joshua.
Yeah. So, when she lets them down, she lets them down by a scarlet thread, which we'll talk about in a moment. So again, they're playing on the words, tikvat, scarlet.
Oh, no, she doesn't let them down by a scarlet thread. Scarlet thread is a sign that she puts the cover on the way in. She lets them down with a chevel.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. So, but the fact is that they're playing on tikva and tikvat. And then to get this connection, an even greater connection, go on.
Rav Nachman said to him, I know the elder, and some say that he said to him, blackened pot. From me.
In other words, this is how he referred to him. He referred to him as that, he was working so hard in studying Torah. They probably didn't have time for a shower. I don't know. Anyway, go on.
From me and from you, the matter may be concluded. For Rahav converted and married Joshua. Did Joshua?
Sorry. No, it's really just should be not but now they ask a question.
But did Joshua have any descendants? But it is written, Nun, his son, Joshua, his son.
In other words, that's all it says.
Yeah.
It says his father. It says, Joshua. It doesn't say anything about him having a son.
Doesn't even say anything about him having a wife.
Right.
In other words, Joshua basically is never. There's no personals about him. The way there are almost about every other major biblical figure, and that is basically, puts a question mark. Why?
Joshua had no.
Well, actually, if you see the movie.
Which
the movie?
The 10 Commandments.
Oh, yeah, he has.
Does that tell the whole story?
Oh, yeah.
He's married.
Yeah. Joshua had no sons. Indeed, he did not have sons, but he did have daughters.
Yeah. So, you know, so they get around. So the bottom line is that Rachav, at the very least, is a loose woman, but whatever the questions of her morals previously, she ultimately makes decisions and takes actions that are seen as extremely praiseworthy. And so much of Jewish tradition, I mean, or a lot of, not much, but you know, certainly many parts of Jewish tradition work on, if you will, rehabilitating her. I mean, obviously, she's just a wonderful character within the context of the Bible, but they, you know, build it up even more. Okay.
But I never sold that to the Jewish people. You know, I can prove it, Rabbi. Have you ever in your life met a Jewish woman whose name is Rachel?
No.
Okay, so that shows that this whole, you know, whitewash was a complete failure in terms of anybody ever buying into it.
By the way, I could say that I've never known a Rachav, but I have absolutely no idea. There are all kinds of unusual names now. They have a tendency to be monosyllabic and unisexual. So you have Gal and I don't know, and Tal. It could be, you know, and you know, but even the names, like I don't know if they're male, female. I mean, we had our Rishonah who stayed with us, Shachar. So she stayed with us, but then a couple years later, we had another Rishon, not staying with us, but we became very friendly with him. His name is Shachar. When I was growing
Well,
up,
that's two syllables. Two syllables.
yeah, that's. I'm saying that in other names as well. You know,
Ehud Barak.
yeah. When I was growing up, Daron was a boy's name, but we had a Rishonah here. Her name was Daron. So anyway, so
You get that in English too. You have a name like Leslie. Is that a man's name or a woman's name?
and even Charlie.
Well, now, Rabbi Papi, that's interesting that you should say that. I
Yeah.
never knew of a woman, Charlie, but that's very interesting.
I happen to know one who lives around the corner. But you know, it's not very common generally. Generally, it's just a nickname for Charlotte.
Right.
No,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although
but
it was
Charlie is an actual name. My niece's daughter is named Charlie.
oh, okay, so
She's
there you go.
Yeah, and it's Charlie, the actress.
Right.
You're thinking of Charlize Theron?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Charlie is,
That's
but
Charlize.
Oh,
that's not
Charlize?
Charlie.
There, there are girls named Charlie, although
That's like Patrick and Patricia.
Right.
yeah, it was very funny that you know, I went to Ramah and Charlie, and then, you know, a couple summers, my cousin Charlie also came to camp. So two of us were Charlie. And actually, a year ahead of us was a woman from our congregation who was Charlotte, but her nickname was Charlie. And then my cousin Charlie went to a party with camp friends down in Philadelphia, and he brought with him a good friend from school whose name was
Charlie.
Charlie. And they said, is it? And there was also a young kid at Ramah named Charlie, Chucky Cohen. He went by Chucky.
Where are you going with this? Are you suggesting that Rachel could just as well have been a man's name?
No, I'm just saying that I would just bring up the fact that people thought that everyone in Wilkes-Barre was named Charlie
Oh,
because they kept meeting all these Charlies. But the fact Charlie, and you know, who knows names today, and there are also all kinds of unusual names, and then there are always the unusual names that people give themselves. So, okay, let's go back to the Haftarah because it's just good.
now, should I start there?
Yeah.
Now she had brought them up to the roof and had hidden them in
Oh, I jumped too far. Sorry. The king of Jericho.
The king of Jericho was told, saying, "Here some men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the land." So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who came to you, who came to your house, for it is to search out the entire land that they have come." But the woman took the two men and concealed them. Then she said, certainly the men came to me, but I do not know where they're from. And it was, as the gate was about to be closed at dark, that the men went out, and I do not know where the men went. Pursue quickly after them, for you may overtake them.
Now there are a lot of gaps here. First of all, how does the king of Jericho know that they're there? Who told him? And why is she willing? I mean, she hides them, so she recognizes that there's a danger to them. But why is she so willing to risk her life to protect them? There are a lot of things that are unusual and lacking in this story, or I would say missing details, not lacking. And also, just very interesting that the woman took the two men and concealed them, as the Hebrew says. Wait, where am I?
Went up too far, I think.
Oh, yes. ותיקח האישה את שני האנשים ותצפנו. Should be, so that's titz.
The Farshim understand that as meaning she hid each one individually.
Yeah, she watch individual, titz pano. Right. Now, what's interesting about that word is that it appears elsewhere in the Bible.
Well, Moshe, yeah, I'm glad you're getting to that.
Yeah.
All these allusions to earlier texts.
Yeah, so here, footnote 3.
The other place this word is used in the Tanakh. The woman became pregnant and bore a son. She saw him and he was goodly, so she hid him for 3 months.
Yeah, this is when Moshe is born.
Yeah.
So, very interesting that she rescues them. And just as Moshe's mother had, rescues Moshe first by hiding him. So just kind of an interesting use, especially when it's not used anywhere else in Tanakh. Okay. So going on now.
Now she had brought them up to the roof and had hidden them in the stalks of flax, the one arranged by her on the roof. Now the men pursued after them by way of the Jordan at the river crossings, and they closed the gate after the pursuers had gone out after them. As for them, scarcely had they lay down when she came up to them on the roof.
Yeah, so, great. She sends the pursuers off in a wrong direction. And by the way, just to remember that, ruse were used quite a bit. Hence the important rule in Deuteronomy that you have to make a ma'akah, you have to make a fence on your roof because people went up there to dry clothes. They went up there to dry flax. There are all kinds of things you can still argue that in New York, there's a lot that goes on in the rooftops.
Right.
So, it's... And also, we have to realize, though, that there they didn't necessarily have a penthouse, with a garden. The houses were not exactly all that high. But high enough.
One story. The house was one story. Unless you were rich, then you could basically make a second story. But in the Tanakh, as a default, assume houses have one story, and the roof then represents a place where you're outdoors and you can do things. That would be the equivalent of an outdoor second story. But for example, look what happens in the Mishnah. The Mishnah actually discusses issues of a sukkah on top of another sukkah, or a habayit to ha'aliyah is the first line of a parak and Bava Metzia. The Tanakh always looks upon that type of a thing as worth talking about. Notice how she's minimizing this for her very wealthy husband, who I'm sure is not going to be put out that much by the expense, but it also means that even wealthy people didn't normally have one.
Yeah, they're making the second floor for
Alicia,
sorry, it says Eliyahu. Okay, keep going.
She said to the men, I know that Hashem has given you the land and that the dread of you has fallen upon us. All the settled folk of the land are quivering before you.
Yeah, and the Hebrew, you just have to hear the Hebrew. She speaks to the men. Yadati ki natan Adonai lechem et haaretz, v'chi nafla ematchem aleinu, v'chi namogu kol yoshvei eretz mipneichem. And if you take a look, you compare the language to Shirat Hayam. In footnote 4 here, Shamu amim yirgazun, chiel achaz yoshvei plashet, az nivhalu elofei Edom, ele Moab yochazemu ra'ad namogu kol yoshvei Canaan. The peoples heard.
I don't know why you didn't put in Tipo Alehem and Vatava Pachad. That's the first thing she says.
That's right. Right. Yeah, sorry, I was doing this late at night. So basically the same language. And then that's going to continue as she goes on here. Keep going, for we have heard.
For we heard about how Hashem dried up the waters of the Sea of Reeds before you when you went out of Egypt, and what you did to the two Amorite kings who were across the Jordan, to Sihon and to Og, whom you devoted to destruction. We heard.
By the way, the Hebrew there is Asher Hecheramtem. They were cherem. They had to be utterly destroyed.
Those killed to the last person.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that. Go on.
We heard, and our hearts melted in fear, and no life breath rose within anyone because of you. For Hashem your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath.
That's a pretty powerful statement because, again, comparing it to other verses, we have in Devarim, Ata hareta ladat ki Adonai hua Elohim einod milvado. You yourself been made to see, to know that Hashem, He is God, there is none else besides Him. And v'adata hayom v'ashevota elevavecha. Know today and laid upon your heart, ki Adonai hua Elohim. For God is that Hashem is God. Bashamayim mimal, in the heavens above, yala aretz mitachat, and in the earth below, ein od. There is no one else. So so she obviously knew Sefer Devarim very well. Then going on.
So now pray swear to me by Hashem that since I have acted toward you with loyalty, you also will act toward my father's house with loyalty and will give me a trustworthy sign. You will keep alive my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all those belonging to them and save our lives from death. The men said to her, our life shall be in place of yours to die as long as you do not tell this business of ours. And it will be at Hashem's giving the land to us that we will act toward you in loyalty and faithfulness.
Yeah, and even there, the language, Tikva Freimer-Kensky, may she rest in peace, who's a wonderful, wonderful Bible scholar and a really good person. Her husband, Yibadel L'chaim, Rabbi Aaron Kensky, is a wonderful, wonderful man. Anyway, she's a great Bible scholar. She has an article on reading Rahab, and read what she has to say.
Right. Tikva Freimer-Kensky points out that Rahab's speech contains the essential elements of a Deuteronomic covenant, preamble, and prologue. Rahab's stipulations, Israelite stipulations, sign.
Oath and sign.
Yeah,
so basically that, when we look at covenants, we can see the style. It's not like necessarily an exact quote, but it's a style that she's, and none of this is surprising given that the Deuteronomistic editor is the one who edited not just Deuteronomy, but the historical books. So that's not a shock. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see these things are, this story is just filled with allusions to other biblical texts.
Right.
as we're about to see another one. Go on.
The men said to her, "We are clear of your sworn oath, which you have had us swear here when we come to the land. This cord of scarlet thread you are to tie in the window through which you let us down, while your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household you are to gather to yourself into the house. And it shall be, whoever goes out of the doors of your house outside, his blood will be on his head, and we will be clear, while whoever will be with you in the house, his blood will be on our head, if any hand be against him."
Okay, so here we have, this is going to protect her and her household. What are the things that she has to do?
Bring them all into her house and tie the red thread around her window.
Yeah, so you got to put red on the side of your house. You got to keep everyone inside. What does this sound like?
Sounds like the Pesach.
Exactly. Exactly. So here's another, look at Exodus 12. It's another allusion, most likely. And then go on. Now, if you tell this.
Now, if you tell this business of ours, we will be clear from your sworn oath that you will have had us swear. She said, "In accordance with your words, so be it." So she sent them off, and they went, and she tied the scarlet cord through the window.
And as we know, the story will fully end in chapter 6 of Joshua when Rachav's family is spared. Okay, and then just the conclusion of the Haftarah.
They went off and came to the highlands and stayed there for 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers sought them all along the way, but did not find them. The two men came down again from the highlands. They crossed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and recounted to him all that had befallen them. They said to Yeshua, "Indeed, Hashem has given the entire land into our hand, and also all the settled folk of the land are quivering before us."
Great opening to the book. In contrast to the failed spy mission of Moshe, here we have one that clearly seems to be successful. And then, of course, when we come to the fall of Jericho, that is quite dramatic, as we know. But something else to consider. Well, first of all, the way this thing is set up, we have the word of Vayishlach appearing at the beginning and the end. Vayishlach Yoshua bin Nun. And then, of course, the king also sends Vayishlach HaMelech Yericho El Rachav. He sends to Rachav, and at the end, Vatashlichem, and she sends them and they go. To some extent, the word which appears throughout the story, I mean, it's not like it's hitting you over the head. But
very good, Rabbi Paki.
No, this is Fishbane. Fishbane points this out, that really, what is this story about? It's about mission. So, and also there's an interesting geographical presentation. It starts off with the Israelites on the other side of the Jordan. It follows them into Jericho, and then it ends with them back in the Israelite camp. And but everything is not uncommon in biblical literature. It gets transmitted through dialogue.
Right.
One other crucial issue here. Now, what is the command that the Israelites are to do when they come into the land?
Wipe out the Canaanites.
Wipe out the Canaanites. And and talks about how Sichon and Og were considered cherem. They had to be prescribed. What do they do here with Rachav?
Wipe out the Canaanites, but there are exceptions.
Yeah. And
don't forget about the Gibeonites later on.
Right, exactly. So Fishbane suggests, and a couple of other commentators, that I should really read the section from Fishbane, that this might not be quite, the traditions, the cherem traditions, may not be quite as intense. In some places, yes, but not in all places. Where here, yes, it here.
He has the one in Parshat Shoftim, where it's not unconditional. It's
Right.
conditional upon their failure to surrender. If they surrender peacefully and are, give the gates keys to the city, so to speak, then they are just to be put to servitude, but they are not supposed to be completely slaughtered. The rabbis basically saw this contradiction, and they said that the way you have to resolve it is to assume that the command to annihilate everybody, that's only for the 7 nations of Canaan. All others can spare themselves. And according to the Rambam, they can spare themselves even at the outset by making this condition.
Right. Well, it fits in with the, but as Fishbane says, Rachav goes on to report that she had heard that the Israelite troops had put the Amorites under the ban, cherem, of utter annihilation. The references to the tradition reported in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 34 to 36, but she uses this information here in a wily way. After making this reference to the Israelite conquests, Rachav boldly requests that her act of beneficence to the spies be requited and her family saved. No similar situation is found in any of the war reports in the book of Deuteronomy or elsewhere where the Israelites fulfill the divine demand to annihilate the native Canaanite population. Indeed, such an arrangement would be in complete violation of the divine command to wipe out the resident population and show no mercy. Only in Deuteronomy 20:10 to 18 do we find some qualification of the absolute demand when it gives a special ruling stating that if the locals accept an Israelite call for peace, they are to be spared, though put to slave labor. Whereas if they do not, the males are subject to destruction and everyone else to plunder. But this deviation notwithstanding, we are struck by Rachav's attempt to strike a private deal between elements of the Canaanite population and the Israelite army. For this reason, we must entertain the possibility. Again, it's only a possibility. It's not.
I was just reading that before.
Yeah.
Basically, that's exactly what I was reading. In other words, Fishbane's raising the possibility that what you see in Sefer Devarim, like Lo Tchayeh Kol Neshama.
Yeah. Let me just finish the quote.
Rhetorical.
Yeah. Let me just finish the quote from Fishbane. For this reason, we must entertain the possibility that this text deliberately rejects, which he puts in italics, the harsh law of cherem and opts for mercy for those Canaanites who show kindness to the Israelite people. A silent protest, albeit hedged with signs, oaths, and conditions, may thus lie at the heart of our narrative. And and there are other commentaries who make, I think one of the ways that we have to read, and you're 100% correct, but I think one of the ways we sometimes have to read the biblical text is to recognize that there could be silent protests. There could be the text raising questions within the text.
I think a better word for this would be veiled protests. Okay.
Yeah, I would.
What's in Hebrew? Almost samui. Okay. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to say that in English. But I would say it really means veiled rather than silent.
Yeah. I think veiled is a much better word. I would agree. Because we see that we have the mother of Samson, who was the smartest character in the story, and she's the one who's not named. And clearly she's very important. You have Rachav, who is a colorful character, and yet she stands out.
Notice that the spies are not named.
Right.
Which is very, very interesting, given the fact that the Morocco story makes sure you know the name of each and every one before we even start the action.
Yeah. And actually, apparently, some commentators, Mordechai Silverstein, who does Torah commentary for the Fuchsberg Center, writes in one of his commentaries about how this, some commentators have taken this to be an act of humility. You know, all the spies that went out to scout the land during the time of Moshe were, you know, they were community leaders, and look what they did. But these guys who really, you know, risked their lives and, you know, came back to say, yeah, we can do this. They were unnamed. But I mean, I think the Bible does this so many times. You know, as the rabbis engage.
So what I meant, Rabbi Poppy, was when you started to talk about she's giving a name, but they're not. Now that
Right.
basically has to be part of the artistry of this particular story. It can't simply be, you can't just say this is the way the Tanakh does it all the time. It doesn't quite usually
No.
do like this. You know, this is a special, and I think Yair Zakovich points this out in his commentary on Sefer Yoshua.
Yeah. But I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the Bible is that it often doesn't name characters. You know, it's I joke that the Bible tells its stories on a need-to-know basis only, but that's part of what creates a certain mystery and power to the story. You know, whether, you know, you just sit there and go, but what's the person's name? Who is that? You know, or who is the guy that that Yosef runs into him, that tells him where to find his brothers? You know, I mean, there are all kinds of interesting elements. So hope you enjoy following along the Haftarah this Shabbat.
Thank you.
Yishar Kol Chacha, Rabbi Poppy.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.
All good.
Todah lachem. Thanks to all of you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.